Something quiet has been happening beneath the surface of modern relationships, and most men don't notice it until the damage is already done. You can see it in the way a man carries himself after 6 months with someone he thought was his future. The shoulders are slightly lower. The way he checks his phone is with a mixture of hope and dread. The quiet negotiation he performs with himself each time he feels something but decides it's safer to say nothing. There's a particular heaviness that settles into a man's chest when he realizes he's been building his life around someone else's approval, and the foundation he thought was solid has been standing the entire time. It often starts with what appears to be commitment. A man meets a woman who seems different from the others. She laughs at his observations. She texts back quickly. She makes him feel that this time, the investment will match the return. So he does what he's been taught is honorable. He leans in. He makes her the center of his planning. He starts to arrange his week around her availability. He turns down opportunities because they might conflict with the time she might want to spend with him. He begins to monitor his own thoughts and words, scanning for anything that might create distance, anything that might make her pull back. He thinks he's being mature. He thinks he's finally doing relationships correctly. But there's a mechanism operating underneath that he cannot see, and it's older than dating apps, older than modern feminism, older than the Industrial Revolution. Søren Kierkegaard understood it in the 1840s when he watched men in Copenhagen surrender their selfhood in the name of love. Watch them dissolve into the collective. Watch them trade the difficult work of becoming an individual for the anesthetic comfort of romantic merger. He called it a specific kind of despair, the despair of not being willing to be oneself. And he saw how it played out in romantic relationships with a precision that makes the passage of 2 centuries feel irrelevant. You can watch it happen in real time if you know what to look for. A man stops going to the gym as frequently because she mentions she likes spending mornings together. He abandons the side project he'd been building because it takes attention away from the relationship. He starts apologizing for boundaries he used to hold without thought. He begins every difficult conversation with a preemptive softening, with reassurance, with emotional insurance that he hopes will prevent her from feeling anything negative. He stops saying no. He stops disappearing into his own purpose for hours at a stretch. He makes himself available, responsive, and committed without reservation. And he waits for this to be recognized. He waits for this devotion to be matched. He finally waits for the relationship to feel secure. It never does. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why this keeps happening to you and what it quietly destroys if you ignore it. Kierkegaard lived in a time when European men were beginning to lose their connection to transcendent meaning. The old structures of church and monarchy still stood, but they were hollow. Men were starting to pour their need for meaning into romantic love, into the idea that a woman could complete them, could give them the identity and purpose that religion and tradition no longer provided. Kierkegaard watched this substitution with alarm because he understood something most of his contemporaries missed. When a man makes another person the source of his identity, he risks heartbreak. He commits a form of spiritual suicide. He abandons the one task that makes him fully human, the task of becoming himself. This is the thesis that runs through everything that follows. A man who builds his identity around a woman's validation slowly erodes the qualities that first drew her in. He doesn't lose her because he loves her too much. He loses her, and more importantly, loses himself, because he stopped existing as a separate center of gravity. Kierkegaard called this the aesthetic life, the life of a man who arranges himself around external stimulation and approval, who never develops an internal compass, who mistakes intensity of feeling for depth of being. And the brutal irony is that the more a man tries to secure love by abandoning himself, the more he guarantees its eventual collapse. Watch how it unfolds in modern terms. A man enters a relationship with a woman who seems intellectually alive, sexually confident, and independently ambitious. These qualities drew him to her. She wasn't needy. She had her own direction. The early months feel electric because there's space between them. After all, neither has yet tried to colonize the other's attention completely. They exist as 2 separate people who choose to come together. The attraction is sustainable because it's built on polarity, on difference, on the tension between 2 intact selves. Then something shifts. Maybe it's after they sleep together. Perhaps it's after she introduces him to her friends. Perhaps it's after he realizes he started to imagine a future with her. Whatever the trigger, he begins to operate from a new assumption. He assumes that more investment leads to greater security. He believes that demonstrating commitment Availability and emotional openness will make her feel safe enough to reciprocate. So he starts to double down. He texts more frequently. He initiates more plans. He starts trying to solve her problems. He offers emotional support she hasn't asked for. He begins to treat the relationship like a project he can optimize, a system he can perfect with sufficient attention and care. What he doesn't realize is that he's fundamentally misread the nature of desire. Kierkegaard understood that desire is not a response to devotion. Desire is a response to presence, to the sense that you are encountering someone who exists independently of your need for them. A woman isn't attracted to a man just because he's available. She's attracted to a man because he has somewhere else to be, not as a tactic, not as manipulation, but because a man with a mission, with a purpose that precedes and exceeds her, radiates a kind of gravity that availability cannot manufacture. The man who makes himself endlessly available communicates something different. He communicates that his life was empty enough that her presence could fill it, and that is not attractive. That is not the desire, that is a burden. I work with men who cannot understand why the relationship changed. They tell me they did everything right, they were attentive, they were emotionally available, they communicated, they showed up, they made sacrifices, and still she became distant. Still, she didn't start responding to messages for hours, not minutes. Still, she stopped initiating sex. Still, she began to criticize small things that never bothered her before. His tone, his decisiveness, the way he asks her for her opinion on everything. These men are confused because they operated under a script that told them that devotion equals love, and they're confronting a reality in which devotion without self-possession suffocates. Kierkegaard would say this man has fallen into what he called the despair of necessity, the despair of a man who has forgotten that he is free, who has allowed circumstances and relationships to define him completely, who has lost the ability to choose himself. This is different from the despair of possibility, in which an infinite number of options paralyzes a man. The man in romantic despair has collapsed all possibilities into one. He has made the relationship the sole determinant of his worth. When she is happy with him, he is acceptable. When she is distant, he is worthless. He has outsourced his existence to her perception, and Kierkegaard understood that this is not love. This is idolatry. This is a man worshipping at an altar he built out of his own emptiness. Here's what's happening beneath the surface, in the structure most men cannot see while they're inside it. The man thinks he's building trust and intimacy through consistency and vulnerability. He believes that by sharing his fears, his insecurities, his doubts, he's creating the kind of emotional depth that leads to lasting connection, and in a particular type of friendship he would be right. But romantic attraction operates on different physics. A woman's desire is not primarily a response to emotional intimacy. It's a response to a man's relationship with his own purpose. She wants to feel that she's been chosen by a man who had other options, other priorities, other places his attention could go. When a man makes himself entirely available, when he reorients his life around her schedule, her moods, her needs, he removes the very tension that makes desire sustainable. This happens in stages, though the man rarely perceives them as stages until much later. First, there's the stage of enthusiasm. He's excited to have found someone who seems compatible. He starts making minor adjustments. He texts back faster. He's more careful about his plans. He begins to think about her before making decisions. This feels natural. This feels like the beginning of something real. And it is the beginning, but not of what he thinks. It's the beginning of his slow disappearance. Then comes the stage of negotiation. She begins to express dissatisfaction, usually indirectly. She's less enthusiastic about sex. She's more critical about small decisions. She mentions other men more frequently. The man interprets this as a signal that he needs to try harder, so he increases his investment. He initiates more date nights. He buys small gifts. He sends longer text messages. He asks more questions about her day. He tries to anticipate her needs. He thinks he's solving the problem. He thinks he's showing her that he's serious. But what he's actually doing is confirming her suspicion that he has nothing more important to do than manage her emotions. And that confirmation, however unconscious, kills the part of her that was attracted to him. The third stage is self-abandonment. By now, he's barely recognizable to himself. He's stopped pursuing the thing that was once made to make him feel alive. The hobbies have been quietly shelved. The side business has stalled. The workouts have become irregular. He's stopped spending time with certain friends because she doesn't enjoy their company. He's changed his communication style, his humor, and his opinions on specific topics, not because she demanded it, but because he's developed an internal monitoring system that scans for anything that might create conflict or distance. He's become his own censor. He policies his thoughts before they become words. He has optimized himself for her approval, and in doing so, he has erased the self she originally wanted to be close to. I once spoke to a man who described this process with startling clarity after it was already over. He said that toward the end of the relationship, he would sometimes catch his reflection in a window and not recognize the expression on his own face. He looked smaller, more uncertain, like he was always waiting for permission. His girlfriend had left him for someone else, and what hurt most wasn't the betrayal. I realized that the man she left him for was the same one she had been used to 3 years earlier. Confidence, self-directed, someone who had his own life and invited her into it, rather than someone who reshaped his life around her presence. She didn't leave him because he changed, she left him because he disappeared. Here's the mechanism Kierkegaard identified. When a man loses himself in another person, he doesn't just lose his identity, he loses the very ground on which love can stand. Real love, for Kierkegaard, requires two complete individuals who relate to each other without collapsing into merger. He called this the ethical stage of existence, where a man takes responsibility for who he is, chooses himself, and commits to becoming a self rather than dissolving into someone else. The man who never reaches this stage remains trapped in the aesthetic, where he's always trying to extract meaning and identity from external sources, whether that's pleasure, success, or romantic validation. And the woman, even if she cannot articulate it, can sense the difference between a man who has become someone and a man who is still trying to borrow his identity from her reaction to him. This is why the advice to just be yourself is useless. Most men don't have a self to be. They have a collection of adaptations, strategies, and performances designed to win approval. They have never done the difficult work of sitting with themselves, of defining their values independent of external validation, of building a life they would want to live even if no one ever witnessed it. And so when they enter a relationship, they bring an emptiness they expect the woman to fill. They need to tell her who they are, and she can feel it. She can feel the weight of being someone's entire meaning, and it repels her. Now zoom out from the individual man to the system he's operating within. This pattern isn't just personal, it's civilizational. Modern culture has systematically destroyed the traditional pathways through which men once developed an independent identity. Religion is gone, mainly as a source of transcendent purpose. Physical labor and craft have been replaced by email jobs and service work that provide income but rarely meaning. Male spaces have been dissolved or invaded. Rites of passage have disappeared. The military, fraternities, guilds, apprenticeships, all the structures that used to guide boys into manhood have either collapsed or been neutered. What's left is a vacuum, and into that vacuum has rushed romantic love as the last remaining source of identity and purpose. The modern dating market intensifies this dynamic exponentially. A woman with an average level of physical attractiveness now has access to hundreds or thousands of men through dating apps. Her perception of her options is distorted upward. She can match with men who, in a previous era, would have been entirely out of reach. Those men might sleep with her, but they won't commit because they have their own abundance. So she experiences a strange combination of sexual access and relational scarcity. She can get attention, but she can't get the commitment she wants from the men she wants it from. This creates a specific psychology. She becomes more selective, more testing, more attuned to any sign of weakness or desperation. And the man who built his life around her, who makes himself entirely available, who pedestalizes her, triggers every one of those alarms. Kierkegaard didn't have dating apps, but he understood the spiritual structure underneath. He understood that when a culture loses its connection to higher meaning, people turn to romantic love as a substitute for the divine. They expect another person to save them, to complete them, to give their life purpose, and this expectation destroys both people. The man becomes a supplicant, endlessly trying to earn the grace of a woman's approval. The woman becomes an idol, burdened with the impossible task of filling a void she didn't create and cannot fix. Both are trapped in what Kierkegaard called the despair of infinitude, where the self has become so abstract, so disconnected from any grounding commitment or purpose that it loses all substance. The cost of staying blind to this mechanism is enormous. It's not just the loss of one relationship. is the compounding erosion of self-respect that happens every time a man betrays his own boundaries, his own purpose, his own standards, in the hope that self-abandonment will be rewarded with love. Each time he does this, he trains himself to associate intimacy with self-erasure. He learns that closeness requires him to become less. And this lesson doesn't stay contained in romantic relationships. It bleeds into his work, his friendships, his entire posture toward life. He becomes a man who is always negotiating, always softening, constantly scanning the environment for approval before he moves. He becomes a stranger in his own life, living by scripts written by other people's expectations. And the relationships he does manage to maintain become hollow. Even if a woman stays with him, it's not because she desires him, it's because he's safe, because he's predictable, because he won't challenge her or disrupt her comfort. The passion is gone because passion requires polarity, requires two people who have not merged, who maintain enough separateness that coming together still feels like an event. A man who is dissolved into his partner's life cannot generate that charge. He can generate companionship, maybe even affection, but not desire. Not respect, and without respect, every other gesture of love is just a polite maintenance of an arrangement neither person truly wants. If a system demands your vulnerability but offers no protection, walking away isn't cowardice, it's wisdom. The modern relational landscape punishes masculine initiative while demanding masculine performance. A man is expected to lead but not dominate, to pursue but not pressure, to be confident but never arrogant, to express emotion but not need, to commit but not expect commitment in return. These are not coherent standards. They are a labyrinth designed to keep him perpetually uncertain, perpetually adjusting, perpetually seeking approval, and the only way out is to stop playing by rules that were never designed for his thriving. So what does sovereignty look like in practice? Translated from Kierkegaardian philosophy into behavior, it starts with the recognition that you cannot build a self by committee, you cannot crowdsource your identity, you cannot discover who you are by monitoring other people's reactions and adjusting accordingly. You have to begin with a commitment, a decision that precedes evidence, that doesn't wait for permission. Kierkegaard called this the leap of faith, and while he was talking about religious commitment, the structure applies to identity as well. At some point, you have to choose who you will be, and then organize your life around that choice, regardless of who applauds or abandons you for it. Notice when you're about to apologize for something you don't believe is wrong. Notice the impulse to soften, to reassure, to manage someone else's potential discomfort preemptively. That impulse is the moment of choice. Most men follow it automatically. They issue the apology, they add the reassuring disclaimer, they round off the edge of what they actually think. The sovereign man sits with the discomfort of letting his position stand. He allows the other person to react. He doesn't try to control her emotions. He trusts that if his boundary or opinion creates distance, then that distance is information, not a problem to be solved through self-erasure. Stop pretending that your mission is negotiable. If you're building something, training for something, or setting a standard for yourself, don't let the relationship become an excuse to lower it. This doesn't mean you ignore her. It means you bring her into a life that already has direction, rather than reshaping your life around her presence. When a man says, "I'll skip the gym this week because she wants to do something," he thinks he's being considerate. What he's actually doing is teaching her that his commitments are flexible, that his standards can be bargained down, that he doesn't have anything important enough to protect. That lesson, once learned, cannot be unlearned. She will forever know that you are willing to abandon yourself for her approval. Refuse to fill every silence with explanation. When you make a decision, you don't owe anyone a dissertation on your reasoning. Most men, when they set a boundary or make a choice that a woman doesn't immediately understand, rush to justify it. They explain their logic. They provide context. They try to win her intellectual agreement before they allow themselves to hold the position. This is a covert contract. The subtext is, I will only have this boundary if you validate it. But boundaries don't require agreement. They require acceptance. State what you're doing. If she asks why, you can offer a brief answer, but you don't negotiate. You don't try to convince. You allow her to be unhappy with your decision. You trust that a woman who actually values you will respect a man who knows his own mind more than she'll respect a man who rearranges his mind for her comfort. Allow loss. This is the most complex and most important shift. Most men are so terrified of losing the relationship that they'll do anything to prevent it, including erasing themselves. The sovereign man accepts that some women will leave, some will lose attraction, some will choose differently. And he doesn't chase, he doesn't beg, he doesn't try to negotiate someone into staying. When he senses that a woman's investment is fading, he doesn't increase his own to compensate. He pulls back. He redirects his attention to his mission. He lets the relationship breathe, and if she leaves, he treats it as information. She wasn't compatible with the man he actually is. Trying to keep her by becoming someone else would have been a slower, more painful death than the ending. Begin to move as if your time is the most valuable currency you have, because it is. Every hour you spend managing someone else's emotions. Every evening you spend waiting for a text back. Every weekend you spend available just in case she wants to see you is time you're not spending building the life that will make you someone worth choosing. Kierkegaard understood that time is the substance of existence. How you spend it is who you become. A man who spends his time in reactive mode, always responding, constantly adjusting, and always available, becomes a reactive person. A man who spends his time in generative mode, building, training, creating, and learning, becomes someone with presence, with gravity, with a self that doesn't need constant external validation to feel real. Here are the two paths ahead, and you're standing at the fork, whether you acknowledge it or not. Path 1 is a continuation. You ignore what you've heard here. You go back to the patterns you've always run. You keep trying to earn love through availability. You keep making women the center of your life. You keep softening yourself, adjusting yourself, hoping that enough self-abandonment will finally be rewarded with the security you're looking for. And maybe you'll find someone who accepts this arrangement. Perhaps you'll end up in a relationship that looks functional from the outside. But inside, you'll know. You'll see that she doesn't truly desire you. You'll see that you're playing a role. You'll know that you've traded your self-respect for the appearance of love. And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you'll be smaller, more bitter, more confused. You'll have a life that technically belongs to you, but feels like you're living in someone else's script. You'll look in the mirror and see a man who learned to kneel so nicely he forgot how to stand. Path 2 is initiation. You treat this moment as a threat. Recognize that every moment of discomfort, every time you apologize to get back into someone's approval, every time you abandon your standards to keep the peace, is an opportunity to choose yourself, and you start picking. Not with arrogance, not with cruelty, but with quiet, immovable commitment to becoming someone you respect. You rebuild your life around your mission, whatever that mission is. You protect your time. You say no without guilt. You allow people to be disappointed in you. You stop trying to be liked by everyone and start trying to be respected by yourself. It's harder. It's lonelier at first. The women who were attracted to your availability will leave. The friends who benefited from your lack of boundaries will complain. You'll have moments where you question whether you're just being selfish, whether you're doing relationships wrong. But slowly, something shifts. You start to notice that the people who stay are different. They respect you. They don't test you constantly. The women who are attracted to you are attracted to who you actually are, not to the performance you used to give. And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you'll be someone. Not perfect, not without problems, but yours, a man who exists independently, who chose himself, who built a life worth living, whether or not anyone ever validated it. If you ignore this, you will spend the rest of your life as a guest in your own existence. You will constantly be adjusting, performing, and hoping that the next version of yourself will finally be acceptable enough. You will chase validation that moves further away the harder you pursue it. You will wonder why you feel so heavy, why intimacy feels like work, and why you can't remember the last time you felt genuinely alive. And the answer will be this: you abandon yourself so thoroughly in the hope of being loved that you left nothing for anyone actually to love. If you answer this, you will discover what Kierkegaard spent his life trying to articulate. The self is not a fixed thing you find out. It's a task, a commitment, a choice you make again and again, in 1,000 small moments, to become who you actually are, rather than who you think you need to be for others. That love is not a merger. It's two people who have done that work, who have become themselves, relating without collapsing. That the loneliness you fear on the path of sovereignty is nothing compared to the loneliness of living as a stranger to yourself. That a woman cannot give you a self, she can only reflect whether you have one. The thesis is simple, and you've heard it in different words throughout this entire script. A man who builds his identity around a woman's validation slowly erases the qualities that made her interested in the first place. But here's the part that matters more. She doesn't destroy your purpose. She doesn't kill your mission. She doesn't erase herself. She only reveals what was already missing. If a relationship can pull you away from who you're becoming, you aren't becoming anyone. You are waiting for someone else to tell you who to be. And that is the despair Kierkegaard warned against. The despair of a man who refuses the task of selfhood because it's difficult, because it's uncertain, because it doesn't come with guaranteed applause. If this script hits something in you, if it names a pattern you've been living without seeing, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to keep this work alive for the men who are still wandering in the dark. And remember this, the path back to yourself begins the moment you stop asking permission to walk it. The woman you're afraid of losing by choosing yourself is not the woman who will walk beside the man you're capable of becoming. Let her go. Choose you. Build the life you would live, even if no one ever loved you for it. That is the only foundation strong enough to hold real love when it comes. That is sovereignty. You cannot love anyone well until you've learned to be alone without disappearing.